Coach DeMarco here with another episode of Get Better Basketball Live. Today, my guest is Randy Sherman, the founder and CEO of Radius Athletics. Randy has a wealth of basketball knowledge, so we're going to jump into a number of different topics that are going to help all the great coaches out there. Before we jump into it, make sure you hit that like button below, turn on your notifications, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Another Get Better Basketball Live is up now. Coach DeMarco here with Get Better Basketball Live, and today my guest is Randy Sherman of Radius Athletics. Coach, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, looking forward to it, man. Been wanting to connect and do this together for a while, so thanks for inviting me on, and looking forward to the chat.
Yeah, I appreciate you joining, and I want to jump right into it because I feel like you're one of those people who I follow on Twitter, one of my favorite people to follow because you hit a lot of different areas when it comes to coaching. Mm-hmm. And I know there's a lot of coaches out there who have a great deal of respect for you as well. My weekly Twitter chat, your name came up multiple times as someone who mentors coaches and does a great job, mentoring them, and they appreciate all that you do. So I wanted to start by asking you to speak a little bit about your RAMP program. I've done some research on it, and I obviously see that you share a lot of ideas. And as I noted, there's a lot of coaches out there who appreciate what you do for them. So could you just tell us a little bit about what RAMP is and how it got started?
Yeah, I'll start with how it got started, and it kind of got started by accident, Coach. Like I coached high school basketball in Texas for 11 years. And I got out of coaching and kind of worked in the sports performance business for a while. And then, was looking for a way to maybe re-enter basketball, but not really sure what that was going to look like. And some coaching colleagues of mine, some guys I coached with and against, said, man, this is about the time Twitter and social media and things like that were really kind of, on the come up. And they were like, you should just, use Twitter and tweet out some of your thoughts and some of the drills and offense and defensive stuff. And they were just showing me examples of other folks who kind of in the early stages of basketball Twitter, if you will, were doing that sort of thing. And I was like, all right, okay. I didn't have a social media background or anything. It just sort of, so I just gave it a try, and maybe I had a little knack for it. I don't know, but like I began to study the science behind social media and growing an audience and building a brand, and I happened to be married to someone who's a marketer, so she was helpful, and that's kind of how it began. Kind of on a just all right, well let me just do this for fun for a little while, and then as the interest grew and the audience grew and some of the ideas, and I began to see sort of some potential on how I could re-enter basketball by helping coaches, that's when I sort of made it more of some sort of a formal type organization, and it's still really kind of informal. I would describe Radius Athletics as being crowd-funded or fan-funded, like fans of the stuff I write, fans of the diagrams I create, just drop a little bit in my tip jar every month, and enough of those, and you've got yourself an income. And I would say RAMP would be for the guys who and girls, the guys and the men and women who contribute the top amount every month. I give them some perks and benefits, and then among those are some one-on-one interaction with me where I help them, on a personal level through one-on-one conversations. I've been using Zoom and Google Hangouts before it was cool, like before it was a thing, and to connect with coaches from all over the US and world, quite frankly. And yeah, I guess that's how its origin was. And I'm surprised that it's had a little bit of staying power, but here I am, and it's been really fun, and I've met some great people. I've met some coaches who now I would count not only, as mentees or but friends, like guys who I would call close personal friends at this point. So it's been fun, and I hope it continues to be fun.
One of the things I noticed in the pillars for ramp is, simple, seamless basketball. And
Yeah.
we have a lot of stuff out there about simplifying the game. And
Yeah.
that's something I appreciate as a coach, and a lot of great quotes. And saw one recently that I really like.
Okay.
First, get brutally simple. Next, get brutally good.
Right.
And, what does that mean to you? And how do you help coaches to simplify the game? As I know it's one of the pillars of the ramp program.
Yes, I would say that when I started ramp, I just sort of my preliminary vision of what I would be doing was going to be sharing drills and diagrams and offenses and things like that. And then when I began to have these conversations with coaches one on one, and hear their questions and their concerns and their worries, uh, I saw a different, maybe you could even say a greater need than like the X's and O's, like that can wait. We'll talk about that. We need to talk about this first. And one of the things that I saw that I really didn't know it when I was coaching, but now that I'm doing this, that I look back and reflect back, is the reason my teams were good at some things is because that's all we did. Like that's it, like we ran motion offense, up 10, down 10, the best team on our schedule, the worst team on our schedule, who tall, short opponent, fast, slow, whatever. That's what we did every night, never changed. And I thought that's just how coaches operated. I didn't know that was, but what I learned after talking to coaches one on one, that's really not how coaches operate. And I began to see sort of a need to point out, if you will, that complexity is standing in your way quite often. That when we have a problem, and if that problem is my team is not as competitive as I'd like to be, that's the problem that we have. We can answer that one of two ways. We can address that problem through more, or we can address that problem through less. And I guess what I encourage coaches to do is to maybe consider the alternative of addressing it through less, doing less, removing some of the complexity, to where, hey, let's see if we can master a few big tenets of basketball and see what that does to our competitive level. And then we'll talk about, layering on top of that.
I saw you mentioned right around the holiday season, you mentioned kind of the ripcord effect with
Yeah,
coaches
yeah.
kind of pulling the cord on things. And that always got me as a football coach too. Get a couple games in and you see
Hmm.
coaches change their whole offense, they lose a game. And I don't know that that's ever been very effective. And I really liked your analogy. So that's just another good example of,
Yeah.
the simplifying and really kind of sticking to what you do. And we're going to jump into that a little bit
Okay.
later, a little bit more. But I wanted to ask one more question about ramp. You talk about the self scout process and
Hmm.
using analytics as part of your ramp program. So can you just talk a little bit about how you incorporate the self scouting in with coaches? That came up on Twitter recently, and
Yeah.
coaches were asking, how do you self scout and what are some of the things you do? So it's an interesting topic, and just curious how you use it with your coaches.
Yeah, I think for most of my audience are high school coaches, a few college and professional, but most of my audience are high school coaches, and they just sort of lack sometimes. And you can probably empathize with this. A lot of coaches just lack manpower, like they don't have the help that you see. An NBA team with 15 guys in suits behind the bench, they're all there to help, but a lot of times you're on your own. So with the self scouting process, I always encourage first is like I would encourage coaches to do it after their season, probably not immediately after, but after a few weeks, a month after their season, and literally just try to do a mental exercise where you detach yourself from the idea that I'm the coach of this team, and almost take the stance that like this team is someone I want to play, I'm going to play against, or I would, if I were preparing for this team, how would I go about it, or what are this, and to try to look at that your team almost with that sense of detachment, looking for tendencies, looking for what I wanted to prove, if you will, to myself when I did this, when I actually coached, was the things that we work on and that we devote the lion's share of practice time to, is that what's leading to winning? Is that what's leading to the points we put on the board? Is that what is leading to the stops we get on defense? I think there's a disconnect sometimes. I know there was with my teams where what I believed about through anecdotal, my eye test, if you will, or anecdotal belief about this is how we score, man, this works all the time, or man, this never works, or something like that. Like, I just felt like you need to kind of run an experiment to prove or disprove some of those hunches or anecdotal feelings you have about your team and your performance. I'll tell you, when I did this for my teams, it completely reshaped the way I coached after that exercise. What I found was some of the things that I was spending a an inordinate, it turns out, amount of practice time on were really not our most efficient possessions. That wasn't how we scored the most efficiently, so what I began to do was this next process, I would say, is there's a bit of a letting go. Like, there's some things that like coaches are really married to as a coach, that like, I love this offense or this defense, but if the data and the numbers are telling me that that's not your best feature, then you got to let go of it and move toward what is. So I think that's the end goal of that self-scouting process, is to just to really zero in tighter and tighter as video evidence, empirical statistical evidence mounts on what drives winning and what we can do more of or less of to affect that outcome.
I think it's a really good segue too into something that I saw you talk about recently, which is overcompensating in certain areas. When
Yeah.
you look at the data and sometimes you watch a game and give it the eyeball test, and you might feel like there's certain things you struggle in. Sometimes you're right, but
Yeah.
sometimes you go back and look at the data and you might see that maybe you did a little bit better in that area than you had originally thought. And
Right.
you gave a great example of overcompensating, conditioning players and feeling like you needed to do more conditioning.
I always reflect on my own behavior and share the good and the bad. so like the example you gave, I was deathly afraid of my teams not being in shape, and it was something that just kind of my pet peeve or my pet project was to get my teams in tip top shape, get lean, get strong, get fast, get mobile. That was just something that one, I felt like with some of the background and that I had, and two, I saw the results of that bear out on the court, that I just wanted more and more of. And what I would point it out in that tweet was, I think maybe there were some games where, because I have this need for our teams to be the best conditioned team in the area, the state, or whatever, we might have showed up dead-legged. Like, man, you're pushing them too hard, coach, and no one told me that, or no one had my coaching staff, or none of the players I coached for sure would say, coach, like, we're tired. They were afraid to say, because if they would have come to me and said, coach, we're tired, I said, oh, well, guess what? I can fix tired back on the track, back in the, so I always start with my own behaviors, but I do see overcompensation common. I'd say the most common one I probably see would be um, a coach maybe whose team's not at the competitive level they would like them to be, so they overcompensate with X's and O's and just a thicker playbook, like, and then what you've got now is a team that's already kind of behind in skill or talent level. Now they're kind of swimming in information, and that's even slowing them down or causing more errors. And you've tried too hard to fix a problem. So yeah, I would say that is fairly common, the overcompensation. And in that Twitter thread, there was some coaches who shared some great overcompensations that they've done, like maybe trying to they had a high need that, as the coach felt maybe an insecurity about, like maybe his athletic director or the fans in his community or something are going to perceive his team as unprepared. And that really doesn't sit well with him or her. So that coach like scouts and scouts and scouts and gives their player like a 78-page scouting report. And the kids are just like, what? So that's an overcompensation, right? Like, I'm so worried of looking unprepared or that my team doesn't look, quote, well coached, that I go too far with the detail, right? So yeah, I would say, man, it's common. And again, I can't stress this enough. I was as guilty as anyone of some overcompensations that I've already mentioned. And it's just another thing that when I help coaches that I start to see them sort of maybe show evidence of that, I just say, hey, maybe you're overcompensating, and we can talk about that, but that's a common thing, I think.
I think I would be guilty of overcompensating in some area. Wish we had talked a few years back, because I definitely was guilty of a few of those things too. So.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, a coach is a passive participant in the game.
Yeah.
Once the ball is tipped, a coach is a passive participant in the outcome of that event.
Yep.
So that doesn't sit well with us, right? We want to somehow wrestle a bit more control and certainty that we will come out with a favorable outcome. And that emotion sometimes drives us toward overcompensating.
So one of the other things that I really, read up on, I should say, you've had a couple of different blogs on bias, and that's an interesting topic. I'll be honest,
Yeah.
I've never really seen that, discussed in terms of like the coaching community. I'm sure there's stuff out there if I dug deep enough, but I feel like on social media, in terms of that discussion point, and you've talked about a couple of different types of bias, and two I wanted to hone in on, which I thought were really cool. One is the survivorship bias, and if the best team does this as an example, then you should do that too. And you gave a really nice example of the pack line defense. And just curious on your experience. I feel like a lot of what we've talked about right now has been your own personal experience. So is that something like you've had self-reflection of like your own bias in situations, or is that from experience, or just from researching other coaches and really kind of learning through your mentoring program?
Great question. I would say yes. We're all guilty of this. I would say though that like maybe when I was a college student, I was exposed to some academic work around these cognitive biases that you're mentioning. And the cognitive bias is a fancy way of saying a thinking error, just an error we commit in our thinking that's sort of like almost at a subconscious level. That they're biases that sort of help us make sense of the world, but they're faulty. And there's tons of examples of them. And fortunately, when I was a college student, I was exposed to some academic work around this topic, and it stuck with me. So even that said, when I became a coach, I still probably fell prey to some of these because they're really hard to circumnavigate because they're sort of hardwired in us, and you have to have a conscious effort to avoid them. But I would say the one you mentioned, survivorship bias, is probably the top one that I see in coaching. And you already gave a great example of this tendency. Like, it could also be sort of called, nicknamed copycat syndrome, right? Like if the national champion or the state champion or whatever runs this particular offense, guess what you're about to see a bunch of the next year, right? That's a way we make sense of something that's very difficult. Coaching, winning, is very difficult. So one way our brain makes a mental shortcut of, like, I don't know what to do as a coach. Should I try this? Should I try that? And we click into this mental shortcut of, well, they won and they do this, so that must be right. So, or superior. The problem with that, there's several problems with that, but the main problem, and why it's called survivorship bias, is because, like, okay, if you viewed the NCAA tournament as which it is a bracket, it's almost like a funnel, right? That leads to one team getting spit out the end as the survivor, right? That's survivorship bias, the surviving example of the 64 teams in the tournament. So the main fault with that is that it ignores the non-surviving examples. For example, Virginia is not the only team that runs pack line defense that was in that tournament, right? Like, there were several others and they didn't win. So it ignores the non-surviving examples. It also ignores tons of other inputs that led to that outcome, them winning the tournament, right? The pack line defense wasn't the only reason, which is ignored by survivorship bias. Like, it's not that simple. Just do this one thing and you'll win. There's tons of other inputs: teamwork, camaraderie, Tony Bennett's coaching talent, their offensive shooting skill, and there's so many other inputs that also ignores. So I spoke about this the other day in the Fast Model Clinic, and I would say that what I try to help coaches do is okay, you saw this team run this offense or this defense win, and now you're asking me about it. I always try to answer questions with more questions, like, what do you like about it? What is it about what you saw that you like? That's why you should run it, right? Like, you could see a team that was 4-24 do something and kind of like, well, I like what they're trying to do here. Yeah. And just because they're not going to be a surviving example doesn't mean that they're not on to something. Right. So that's to me, those are the questions I try to help coaches answer. Is what do you want to happen on the court or not happen on the court? That should be driving your tactical, technical, strategic decisions. What do you want to happen on the court? Not just, they won, they do this, and I'll try it, right?
Yeah, it's a great way to look at it. And, you think about coaches sometimes neglecting their personnel for some different styles of play and not really thinking about
Sure.
who they have in front of them. So just those questions that you ask coaches are so valuable because it forces them to reflect and really think about, how it would fit in their program. And just before we jump into some X's and O's, because I do want to talk X's and O's with you as well, but you mentioned action bias as well, and I'm intrigued by action bias. Tendency to think that value can only be realized through action. So could you talk to the coaches out there a little bit about action bias, and why this is something that you feel is important as a topic in coaching?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this one up today, because I saw a great example of it. For those of you who follow who I think is the best basketball personality on ESPN is Jay Billis. If you follow him on Twitter, he shared a terrific example today of action bias on his Twitter feed. There was an article about Clemson football, and the headline was, Clemson, where do they go from here? And Jay Billis was like, good grief, like they're in the playoff, if not the championship every year. What the hell do you mean? Where do they go from here? They probably back to the 2021 playoff. Like that's where they're going to go from here. And that is an example. That writer, I don't even know who wrote the article. I read it, I skimmed it, but like Jay's quote was calling out this writer feeling that Clemson should feel some sort of action bias. Like, where do we go? Like, we lost to Ohio State in the like, they don't need to change much, right? Like Clemson, what they're doing down there is working, right? Like that, I think like the like the definition you gave of like that only through action can we improve. As coaches, I think this is really hard. Is the maybe the word that maybe an informal word would be like stick-to-itiveness, right? Like we lose a game, maybe we get off to a slow start in a season, and we lose a game. It feels wrong to just roll it back the next game with the same offense, defense, strategy, right? But you're just maybe not there yet, or the things you're teaching haven't had enough time to soak in to your players, and that you feel this urge, like we lost, we've got to do something, right? That maybe you do, but maybe you don't. That's all that I would say is like and I think the coaching, a seasoned coach, a coach with a keen eye will know when it is that I need to say, okay, time to re-steer or reevaluate what we're doing, or no, you know what, this is just growing pains and we'll get through it. But this idea, like Jay Billis said, that that's an example of action bias. Like, where does Clemson go from here? Like, what? Like, no, they don't need to like blow it up and get a different offense or news. Like, they just need to keep doing what they're doing. And there's about 5 or 6 other programs who, those are the only teams that have any chance of beating them on the field. They're all competing against one another, and they just minute changes, tweaks, things like that. But like, where do they go from here? That's silly, right?
Yeah, I think that speaks a little bit to the ripcord effect we talked about.
Yeah,
That happens
yes, definitely.
in the season where coaches pull the plug on things. And it's funny because as you were talking, I was thinking about my own experience, and this may be an unpopular opinion perspective of coaching, but I tended to lean a little bit more towards the defensive side, and especially early in the season. And I knew the first couple of games we struggled a little bit to score, but we did a really nice job defensively, and we might win some games by low scoring margin, and that was okay, but our offense would ramp up as the season went on. But I guess through my own reflection, I knew early in the season we might struggle a little bit offensively, and I made some minor adjustments over my years as a coach. But that's just one example as you were kind of talking, and I'm like, I probably could have blown it up when I didn't score as many points as I wanted to early in the year, but we did stick to it and had some degree of success along the way. But
one thing I would say that we stumbled upon in my ramp program that I think really plays into this is I did an experiment one year. It was pre-COVID, when everyone's kind of basketball season's going to start around the same time in the late fall, early winter, whatever. I said, okay, before we all get playing, I sent out a Google form to all the gold medal members, and I said, predict your team's record this year. Before they played a game, many of them before they even had a practice. Predict your team's record. I saved that. I saved all that data. I said, all right, just fill out this Google form, send it back. I'll hold on to it. And then 4 or 5 months from now, when the season's over, we'll look back and see how we did, right? Coaches are terrible at this. Not bad, not awful, but whatever's worse than awful is how these results came back. And most of it was to the good. Like most coaches, I don't know if it's like a story they're trying to tell themselves, or they're trying to put positivity out in the universe or something, hoping it comes back to them. But almost to a person, everyone thought they would be better than what they ended up being. that's a huge problem with action bias. That if I enter a season with this Pollyannic view that like, hey, anyone can be a champion. Everyone's equal playing field. We're all then and when things don't go, if I've got this huge disconnect from what I think my team's going to do and what they're actually capable of, like how a third party might evaluate them.
Yep.
If there's a huge disconnect, man, I'm pulling that ripcord because I thought we were going to be good, but like, and that sounds bad in people's ears. It sounds terrible in coaches' ears to be like, yeah, we're not very good. Like we're just not. And there's really not much I can do X's and O's wise to have changed that. So why don't we just stick to it? So we'll be good when we're good. And that leads to that action bias when there's that, coach, I wish I could call the data up how bad coaches were at this. It was beyond bad. Like some people off 10, 11 games in their win totals.
Wow.
Like, and that's not a knock on them. That's just, I thought maybe that hurt them to hear, but that's beneficial for me to know about myself as a coach. Of like, hey man, I've got this Pollyannic view about things that like someone needs to help, because it's messing up your timeline. It's messing up your decision making. It's for high school coaches, you don't have a general manager. You're the GM and the head coach. And sometimes that job needs to be separated. That's why they do that in the NBA. Because a coach would trade his whole thing for a rebounder for Friday night, right? Like the GM's got to be, so you got to wear both hats as a high school coach and as a college coach. You've got to keep your eye on the horizon of the program and not pull the ripcord because of a short-term setback, you know? And that I think is a lot behind action bias is this, you know, if I go into the season kind of knowing this is going to be a year where we're going to struggle, or like your anecdote of like, yeah, I know because of the way I kind of sequence our teaching that this is going to be behind that when we start the season. It's okay. It's okay. We don't win in November. We win in March, right? Like, so those are all things that information and being aware of these sort of roadblocks in our thinking, like these two biases you mentioned, can be helpful for coaches.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's a tough thing sometimes. And I appreciate
Sure.
what you share on the, you know, with the biases, because sometimes as coaches, we don't think about them. And you know, it does make a big difference. So
We're not as smart and as rational as we think.
no,
Just not.
yeah, often we are not. So
Right.
one of the other things, as we kind of transition now maybe into a little bit more X's and O's talk,
Okay.
I love the stuff you put out there on spacing. And, you know, you talk a lot about spacing and give a lot of great examples. And, you know, you talk about your role as a coach and implementing a motion type conceptual offense.
Mhm.
And you mentioned two things, being a steward of spacing. And I wanted to start with that. And then I'll
Okay.
jump into the other point, which gets into enforcement of some of the do's and don'ts. But can you talk a little bit about being a steward of spacing, and like what advice do you have for coaches to effectively teach spacing? It's so critical to your success on offense, but it's a very difficult thing to do, and
Yeah.
to do that in practice successfully. So what advice do you have for coaches when it comes to spacing?
Well, I'd say it's like an abstract concept, right? It's not like you know, we all know what a screen is or what a cut is, but like spacing is sort of like an artistic abstract thing. You just know it when you see it and you know it when you don't see it, right? But like I would say that as a coach, when in the two things you mentioned, especially if you're going to run an offense where there's freedom and there's not, you know, play calls, there's just more of like we start with an alignment, we have do's and don'ts. Then one of the things that you, as a coach, you're going to see slip if you don't constantly police it is your spacing. And you know, man, you ask a tough question, and that's great. Like, how do you coach it? You know, like, I don't know if I'm allowed to say I don't know, but like, I would say we all know what it looks like. We all know where I would like my guys to stand a little bit higher, a little bit deeper, a little bit lower, a little bit wider, whatever the case may be. We all know what spacing is. There's no secret to the boundaries on the court, and getting to corners and getting high and wide up top. But I think the reason why some coaches teams reflect it a little bit better than others is because the coach, it doesn't get deprioritized. It I sometimes feel like, I hear a coach talking about teaching or inputting their offense, and I'm going through their practice plans with them, or, they're asking me questions about what I would teach this. And like the bulk of the minutes that are going to show up, if we practice the way that maybe their brain is telling them to install this, are going to be spent on the granular details of actions. Like, we're going to work on screening, like sticking our foot right here and having this, and I want you 17.4 centimeters off the elbow, and like all of that. That's what's in their brain, rather than like, just go screen for them. You guys do need to do that. It's like the things that coaches want to coach are maybe the more detailed stuff, and not the more macro level stuff. So I don't know if I'm answering your question. I'd say that, like, to emphasize spacing is just, don't let anything else become more important. And if you were to record your practices and you heard yourself, spending your coaching interjections on granular level stuff, and your coaching interjections don't sound like higher, wider, deeper, then you may end up with bad spacing. It needs to be your priority as a coach.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I just think, as a younger coach myself, and that would have been advice that I would have really benefited from. It wasn't really until I started to get into a little bit more of the dribble drive offense and really
Yeah.
think about Vance Wahlberg and intentional spacing. And
Yeah,
as
that's a great example.
as a younger coach, I didn't give it the attention that it needed. And I think I unintentionally gave it
Sure.
that attention later on in my career because of the type of offense I was using. So I think that's really good advice for coaches in terms of making it a point of emphasis, because I know myself, I would focus on, the screening or other aspects
Yeah.
of the game, and not give the spacing the attention that it really does need, and that we see it needs as we watch high level basketball at college and at the professional level too.
And I think there are some things that I could probably mention that maybe some landmarks on the court that you could utilize. A common thing I see in particular in high school basketball is an offense playing with too little depth, meaning sometimes they're, if they're a 4-out team, those wings, if you will, or forwards, as some offenses might call them, are just, too high, and there's not they're not stretching the defense along the vertical axis, if you'll let me kind of borrow from mathematics, right? Like, that they're the fear that I hear with coaches is they sort of feel like their guys need nearby support. They need, like, if my guys' teammates are too far away from them, something bad's going to happen, right? Like, that just comes back to where maybe a counterintuitive thought of like, well, you're also bringing the defense nearer to this player you're afraid of doing something wrong too. So, and you're crowding the spacing. Less space equals less time, and an inferior player is going to make more mistakes when he has less time.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's some of the things that I would say I help coaches with is like, just, we first begin with their positioning on the court and just trying to enlarge it. Second, I would say, all right, you can tell me the 17 things about ball screen reads like you got to memorize, but look at your three guys outside of the ball screen. Like they're just screwing this up, right? Like why aren't you talking to them? And where they're standing is sabotaging this action, right? So I think really maybe developing a sound philosophy of okay, when I look at an offense or something we're going to use, maybe it's just a drag ball screen in transition or any sort of action. Not only do I need to coach the guys in the action, but I've got to position the players out of the action. First, to me, the first starting point of teaching spacing is just like getting them off, like they want to play with their tippy toes on the high school 3-point line, getting them backed off of that, get into what I call hold the sideline, which would be heels on the sideline rather than moved inward toward the medial aspect of the court. Then you can, after we've kind of got our guys figuring out, okay, when I'm not in the action, I'm going to stand higher, wider, deeper. Then we can talk about moving and manipulating would-be helpers with some around the ball movement. But I think the prerequisite of that is let's get guys when they're not in the action, think creating space. And once they do that habitually, let's talk about then manipulating the help through some movement, right?
And one of the things too, as I look at a lot of the stuff that you put out there for coaches, a lot of great stuff on spacing and some really great points there for coaches to take away. And you talk about a motion conceptual type of offense.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have a lot of stuff out there on the Princeton offense. And you started to put stuff out there on the Princeton offense. And I have to be honest, and seeing some of that stuff, I'm like, man, I always I wanted to learn more about this. I need to do more. So I started to look up some of the stuff that you put out there, some of your stuff on YouTube. I started to watch. I'm watching Nebraska Wesleyan play a basketball game, and they're a great program, and that's no disrespect to them, but I didn't know a lot about them in the past. So I started really becoming interested in the Princeton offense. So I just wanted to kind of pick your brain a little bit about that offense, but how did you kind of start to study that? And because you do know a lot about it, you have a lot of stuff out there about it. So how did you start getting into the Princeton offense?
Well, I don't know anything about it. Anything I know about it, I did the same thing you did and just researched and learned. I never ran it as a coach, really. Like maybe we taught some things that are baked into it, like if you're overplayed, cut back door, if you dribbled at, things like that. That's sort of a baked into that. And there's some like iconic offenses in the history of basketball that have bled over into other offenses, and I would say Princeton's one of them. But coronavirus, COVID-19 came along about March. I kind of looked at the way the future was shaping up as far as that goes, and I was like, you know what, probably not going anywhere for a while. So I decided to address a weakness I had as a coach, and that was like you're saying, I don't know anything about Princeton offense. This is going to be my coronavirus COVID-19 project. That simple. I just started digging into it. I work with a few coaches in Ramp who are running it or who have ran it, and they were great resources. I would say that a year ago, I knew not same as you, just really a rookie around it. So I began to sort of dig into it. There's some things I like about it that I got excited about creating some content around that, like the way it sort of begins with a trigger, a pass to the wing means this, a post entry means that, and how it can be executed without calls. Like we just come down the court in this shape, and where we go with the ball dictates what phase of the I'm attracted to stuff like that. That can be run without a whole lot of coach intervention in the game. So that if it didn't have that element into it, I probably wouldn't be interested in it and wouldn't have worked as hard creating the stuff that I did on it. I like watching Princeton teams play. I like to watch Richmond. I like to watch, University of San Francisco. Nebraska Wesleyan was a program that got brought to my attention. Probably of all the teams that I watched, they're phenomenal at it. They're the best. So I enjoy watching it, and that's another thing that sort of keeps me interested in working on something. Is if I enjoy it, I'll keep learning more about it. Um, but I'd say probably the thing I like most about it is how it can sort of begin with one trigger, a post feed, a wing entry, a guard to guard pass, and how just that one little thing takes it down a whole different flow chart of actions. The second thing I like about it, that when teams get really good at it and all the fundamentals behind it are there and the know-how is there, that in theory it's sort of indisruptible. If they do this, there's a counter. If we make this pass, and if you know there it just keeps going. Like the show goes on and on and on, and and teams that can get it to that level would be really hard to guard. And yeah, so that's how it all began. I as just a project to sort of maybe occupy some time and attract a different audience of coaches during coronavirus.
Yeah, and all the things that you just mentioned is what got me intrigued about it too.
Yeah,
It's a cool offense to study and to kind of research as well and learn about. And I just want to kind of segue now. Just I have a couple other X and O's questions,
sure.
but I want to go back to ramp for a second here because you got me thinking. And you have some coaches that are using the Princeton offense. You have some coaches that are probably using conceptual. Probably a lot of different types of offenses or defensive looks. And I'm just curious, as you are supporting coaches, and for coaches that are watching this, it sounds like there's a really great mentoring, like coaching piece, the mental aspect of coaching.
Hmm.
And then is there an X's and O's piece to that? And are you doing some film study with them? I know you mentioned some self scouting, but what does the X's and O's side of ramp look like for you as you work with coaches?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say that like there's a lot of other coaches now who are doing what I began 5 years ago, and some were doing it before I began this stuff. And uh, a lot of those are sort of like there's a product that's the focal point of it, like a read and react
Mhm.
tribe, if you will. Like I think that's something that many coaches watching probably are familiar with, or maybe once kind of participated in or still do. And it's the focal point is that offense. And I would say what I'm doing with coaches is different than that. I don't have an agenda to push like that. I would say if there's any agenda that I'm pushing is I want coaches to feel what it feels like to have the product you want on the basketball court, not the one you feel forced into to personnel, not the one you feel forced into because you don't have, but like let's see if we can get you on a path of coaching the way you want to, no matter what that looks like. So I have what I did as a coach, but I help coaches who do things that are completely opposite of that. you know, who some guys like blondes, some like brunettes, right? Basketball's no different. Like some like up tempo, some like slow down, set it up. Some like man to man, some like zone. It's just, but like what I want to help coaches with is get on a path to to uh, having what you want as a program, and that's going to look different for everyone. And there's so many fears and obstacles that coaches have of that are keeping them from, well, yeah, if I had whatever, I would run this. Some of that's made up, honestly. Some of that's in your head. Some of it's fearful. Some of it is the coach's own fear of not looking, of that growth curve that's going to take to get that. Um, what I do with coaches is see if I can put them on a path to having that, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, that's one of the things I like about what you're doing is you work with coaches from a lot of different backgrounds, and seems like your focus is really on helping them to get better. You don't have that agenda. You're honed in on whatever it takes to help them improve. And you gave us a lot of great examples as we talked today. And just kind of going back to the X's and O's side of things for another minute here. Just thinking about decision making, that's a topic that comes up a lot. And you gave a good example that ties into decision making in terms of when there's a drive to the basket, there's a penetrate and you score. You gave an example of like a kick out and then a shot. You don't like the idea of penetrate, make that kick out, and then an immediate drive, obviously because the defense is collapsed. And that's really research based. If you look at those situations, I can't think there's many of them that come out well, but penetrate, pass, and shot, and then penetrate, pass, and drive. And yes, I did take notes on that because a lot of different examples there, but it ties into this concept of decision making and working with players in practice to help them with those decisions that are going to, not everything is going to be a perfectly scripted pick and roll or pin down for a shot. There's going to be times where you have to make decisions in the game. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, but also, for coaches that want to teach players decision making, because that's such an important part of the game. What are some recommendations or even one suggestion that they might be able to use to improve that area for their team?
Yeah, I would say what I did and what I've shared with a lot of coaches is to teach offense in particular, even to some degree defense, and we could talk about that, but to teach offense through a series of if-then statements. And it's not always possible, Coach, but when it is and where it is for coaches, I think it behooves us to make things very binary for our players. If this, then that. If I'm driving to the basket and I have a small advantage and there's some sort of help that gets in my driving line, there's not 14 items for me to run through. There's 2, right? Drive to score, pass. So where you can as a coach, always be challenging yourself to get whatever decisions are going to take place in your offense down to binary if-thens. It's not always possible. There might be 3 things or something like that, but where it is possible, I think that's where players are you're going to see an increase in percentage of the right decisions being made. I tried to do that with my players where things were very, very, very little, it depends, but coach, what if, like I didn't want to deal with any of that really. I've tried to get it to where everything is binary. It's not always possible, but that would be one piece of advice I would give coaches for decision making is I was watching something, and it might have been about the Princeton offense. Okay, well, we get it to this point, and the guy who's got the ball has 6 options. And I'm like, good luck. That could be probably reduced, at least on the front end when we're installing, when we're newbies to something. But if you're going to play conceptually, and I think when I say that, what I mean is most of the decisions when you're going to be playing conceptually are made while you're on the attack rather than while you're holding the ball. If you're going to do that, I think it's very important for you to reduce decision options down to 2, 3 maybe options, and it needs to be in response to the defense. So my next bit of advice would be in your drilling, in your skill development, in your drilling, make make what you're teaching players little microcosms of those decisions that they're going to see often, and then they get closer to becoming automated in gameplay, in live play.
That's great advice for coaches, and I really like the trying to pare down those decisions when players have the basketball. There's a lot of value in that, and think about film sessions too. There's probably some nice opportunities to
Yeah,
really have players reflect on some of those decisions there as well.
yeah. The the offenses that are in vogue now, a lot of they're drive and kick based. They're 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 based in creating closeouts. Um, that's what we're seeing at the NBA level on down. Um, if you're going to turn your players loose to play like that, then this is really the art that the coach needs to master. Because if you don't have it down in your head, and you can't impart it in your team, you're missing the essence of that style of basketball.
So, Coach, as we wrap up here, I wanted to ask you, just thinking about ramp, and it's very appealing to me for really coaches in different parts of their career. A coach who has a little bit more experience, like myself, I feel like there's a lot of value in being able to have a conversation with another coach and reflect with them. And so I think there's a lot of value in that, and obviously being a newer coach as well. So, do you have coaches from beginner, or I hate to use the word beginner,
Yeah.
but newer to coaching, all the way through coaches that have been doing it for a little bit longer? Because we're going to get a range of coaches that are going to watch this, and for me, again, as someone that has a little bit of experience, I would want to be involved in that if I was still coaching a team, because I feel like the value in that conversation. So are you seeing coaches from different experience levels?
Yes, I would say it probably skews a little bit toward younger, but I think any technology based business skews a little young, right? Like some of the older coaches. Well, everyone knows how to use Zoom now, but 5 years ago, that
No.
so I think there's a little bit of inherent skew toward younger just because it's based on Twitter. So I try to, again, an example of thinking clearly in the like it skews young. Why? I think that's one reason. I think, but I do have coaches. I have coaches that are senior citizens in the group, and I have some that have been coaching 20 years or more that have won multiple state championships and different states, and I don't know that there's one coach that it would work the best for. I don't. I do think that there are some veteran coaches who probably hear that word mentoring and are, maybe it's some branding error on my part. Maybe I could have used something, but like they hear that word mentoring and they're veteran coach, and they're turned off by that because that sometimes feels like someone knows more than you, and this guy's trying to tell me what to do. Who is he, right? Like, so that might be a turn off to some older coaches, but that's kind of silly because that's not what mentoring is. Mentoring is just guidance, right? Good or bad, take it or leave it, right? Like my, I would say um, the older coaches that I do work with are the type of men and women who have remained intellectually curious throughout their life. Um, they've remained sort of like hungry for just incremental improvement, and they're open to new ideas and new and having their ways and ideas sort of questioned in a respectful way. As far as the younger coaches, that's probably the demographic I enjoy working with the most. Uh, and again, like I said at the outset, it comes from a place of me reflecting on my time as as a coach, like I needed something like this. I needed someone like the person that I am now. I was a head coach at 22 years old, 23 years old, and thought I knew. I was so full of arrogance and I had the whole thing figured out, right? And boy, it the coaching profession has a way of humbling people like that. And 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 I certainly got that. Um I would say I feel strongly about helping coaches at that stage in their career, simply because I can see my younger self in them, and I want to say, look, man, I know this is what you think, but trust me on this. This is going to happen. It's almost like, when you're a parent of a child, like, they're about to crash, but you kind of just got to let them just, like I'm trying to prevent that with some of these guys. Like I'm not going to let you crash, the I do think my favorite type of coach to work with is maybe the coach that's been a head coach at this school, got the job when they were young, got their teeth kicked in, you know, didn't all the grand plans that they thought they had it all figured out didn't kind of happen the way that they thought. They've moved to another school. They're a head coach now, and this is their first year. That's my favorite coach to work with. Like, all right, let's learn from the small sample size of experience we have. Use mine, use the other coaches in the group to get you on a better path at this new station, right? So yeah, man, all ranges of coaches. From I've worked with youth coaches, junior high coaches, professional coaches, anywhere in between. So yeah, there's no one coach that it's wrong or right for.
Yeah, and I think, just hearing you talk, I just keep thinking of it's kind of popular education term now, but like growth mindset just keeps coming to mind. Those coaches who
Yes,
really want to keep learning and growing and, getting better, as much as possible. And the example of the coach who maybe didn't have a lot of success their first run, but they come back and they can have a great experience. And that happens a lot. That happens a lot in
sure.
coaching. Um, I think if they have that growth mindset, they're probably going to end up on the better end of it. So just as we wrap up now,
Mhm.
coaches that want to reach out to you, I know obviously you're very popular on Twitter, and probably a lot of coaches on Twitter that are going to be watching this. But if they do want to get in contact with you, learn more about your RAMP program, or just
Yeah.
have a question about anything you talked about, is there a way that they can connect with you?
Yeah, you already mentioned Twitter. At Radius Athletics is where you can find me. DMs are open. Just um, I like coaches to, before they commit to this sort of relationship together. Let's talk first, and just and you know that's I think the best, the coaches that have come into the program, that have stayed and got the most out of it. I think back to, that's how it began. There was like, hey, tell me about this, and well, let's talk tomorrow. I'll send you a link and we'll chat. And so I would encourage anyone who's curious just to send me an email, randy@radiusathletics.com. You can go to radiusathletics.com and there's a contact form. You can reach me that way too. That and just say, hey, I'm interested in a conversation, potentially get involved. And I don't want someone to enter it into it thinking that this is like, oh, I'm just going to get some plays and some drills and I'll, get what I need and get out. Like that's, I don't want that. So I want to screen for that too. When I talk to someone, like I want to screen for that too. And I want someone who's like, I like the way you think. I like the way I think you could challenge me. And I've heard great things from other coaches and I witnessed their growth. I want to be a part of it. That's the member I want. So I always like to have a conversation first with someone before jumping in.
Well, I know that you already have a large group of coaches following you on Twitter and coaches as part of your ramp program. And I think after hearing you talk tonight and talk hoops and just coaching in general, you're going to have quite a few more. It was a pleasure, honestly, to talk to you tonight and, really hear you, kind of think through the game and get some of your thought process and even through some of the quotes that you put out there and hear that next step in that thought process. So I appreciate it and all that you do for coaches out there on social media. I just want to thank you for joining me tonight.
Well, I appreciate what you do. I know not to schedule any ramp activities on Wednesday night during the Twitter chat you host, or I won't have anyone show up. So like, I appreciate what you do. I've enjoyed a lot of the stuff you've shared. So I'm glad we finally got to chat. So appreciate you having me on.
Me too. Thank you again.
All right, man.